The January 6th committee wants to chat with Sean Hannity. Why? Because as part of its investigation, even more text messages are surfacing that the Fox host was in the very middle of strategy sessions with then President Trump and the White House. More importantly, what Hannity was saying privately was far from the message that he and his network pushed publicly to its viewers, many of whom would march on the Capitol.
So on the left side of your screen, you will hear Hannity's words to viewers. On the right, you will see his private text to Trump allies, members of Congress. We report, you decide.
We have Ted Cruz coming on later in the program. We know that he wants this commission to look into this for 10 days. We're going to have about 150 House members supporting this as well. A big rally. I believe your dad will be addressing that rally tomorrow. Big day tomorrow. Big crowds apparently showed up to the point where the West Wing could hear the music and the chanting of the people that were there already. And this all kicks off in the morning tomorrow.
Well, Sean, that's right. And tomorrow is an important day. We have an obligation, I believe, to protect the integrity of the election and to protect the integrity of the democratic system.
Senator, I'm looking at the support you're getting in the Senate, and I'm looking at the support in the House, maybe 150 members in the end. It's looking like, realistically, can this really happen? I don't like to give this audience false hope. I want to... You know, would we have an audit? Is that real? Is that a possibility? Do you see, for example, do you see any, after tomorrow, is there a path for the president constitutionally?
So as you saw from the text there, and we'll get into much more about what they actually say, because I think they're very important there for this investigation. Hannity knew there was no path, knew there was no constitutional path, but he built up the rally. And he gave voice to people like Ted Cruz, who were pushing the big lie. And you should remember, Fox is being sued for billions for its lies about the election. Then, after the insurrection, Hannity, despite accurately predicting that chaos would happen, floated conspiracies and lies about left-wing actors actually being the culprits.
We also knew that there's always bad actors that will infiltrate large crowds. Those who truly support President Trump, those that believe they are part of the conservative movement in this country, we do not support those that commit acts of violence.
That are peacefully protest. And we had the reports that groups like Antifa, other radical groups, I don't know the names of all of them, that they were there to cause trouble.
Hannity and Fox, they spend a lot of time telling viewers what they think is patriotism. But just to recap here, Hannity's network publicly sold the big lie. They built it up so that a president could carry out a coup, a blatant attack on democracy. Their viewers are being lied to, brainwashed, manipulated. And just to be clear, Fox is not a news network, which is not breaking news, I will say.
Joining us now, CNN political analyst David Gregory and CNN political commentator and former Trump White House communications director, Alyssa Farah Griffin. Alyssa, I want to read one of the Hannity texts first again, because I do think it's very important for the investigation here. And it's very short. He writes on January 5th, "I'm very worried about the next 48 hours. So the Select Committee points out correctly, why? Why was this person who was in constant contact with people inside the White House worried about what was about to happen? What did he know about the plans that were in place that were about to happen? It really is a worthy question.
Oh, it's a very worthy question, and I can't foresee any scenario where Sean Hannity isn't compelled to testify before the committee. I would say this, though. He's worried in either one direction or the other, that he knew that this day was going to get violent and was going to be a mar on our American democracy, or he was worried, as his text seemed to reveal, knowing President Trump had lost the election. He was not going to win. There was no path for recourse. The results were not going to be overturned. And then what that would mean for Trump, how he would handle it. And I think, I mean, listen, this kind of tenuous effort to say that Sean Hannity is a journalist and that might give him some kind of coverage to not have to comply just doesn't pass the smell test. He's very much an opinion commentator, and he's going to have to speak to the committee.
Well, he says himself, he says he's not a journalist, to be clear, right? He says that he's a host. But I wonder, David, these texts, what are the biggest issues that they bring up for you?
Well, I think as Alyssa says, being in direct communication with the president is really important, because I think the committee wants to get to the bottom of how much the president understood about what he was unleashing and what the intended effect of it was. And it's so important that he and his chief of staff are getting these kinds of warnings from straight up allies. These are individuals who are propagandists on Fox News, who are certainly towing his line, and they're the ones saying this has got to stop, or in this case, Hannity preemptively saying this is going to be a horrible outcome. I think that's really important, whether it's to the president himself or to Mark Meadows, his chief of staff at the time. And I think, look, the texts are already very important that the American people have had access to, that the committee has had access to, because it shows you what people were saying when they didn't think the whole world was watching. So it's really quite revealing. Now, if there's all this jockeying about whether or not he actually cooperates or testifies, that may be a little bit beside the point.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. It's already revealing that he had foreknowledge that something was going to happen. Why? What was being discussed? What did he know about what was being discussed? I'd love to find out, but at the same time, the fact that he had foreknowledge, David, tells you just about everything you need to know. The former president was scheduled to hold a news conference at Mar-a-Lago tomorrow, the one-year anniversary, Alyssa, but he canceled. He canceled. And our reporting is because he was pissed off that people weren't going to cover it, that there was a lack of interest around his news conference tomorrow. What do you think happened here?
I think that's very likely. That reporting's true. I have a hard time believing that the former president grew a conscience and realized that this is a solemn day and it would be totally inappropriate to spout his election lies while the rest of the country grieves that horrible day. It's certainly that it wasn't going to break through. But I would note in the statement that he announces he's canceling it, he continues to carry on the big lie. And then he makes this very absurd claim that I think is very important to note, saying Pelosi didn't deploy the National Guard. She could have done it in advance. So he incited a riot, then the riot goes to the Capitol, attacks it, and then he's blaming Nancy Pelosi that she wasn't prepared to, take on this riot that he incited. So it takes a lot of mental gymnastics for him to be able to defend himself on this day, and I think it's very wise that he's choosing to not speak.
It's for the best, David, for everyone, because if you're looking at the possibility of him having this presser and he's just going to be propagating the big lie, he's doing it. It's almost like a battle cry a year later.
Yeah, and the valve of his speaking and his views has been diminished. I also think and those close to him have to be making some calculation about how to treat January 6th. I mean, if there's a political future here for Donald Trump, he wants to try to recast what it was, what it meant, how it happened, because he has turned off so many people already with his role. Whether that's determinative of whether the folks who supported him would still vote for him or not, we don't really know the answer to that. But I think at any political level, he would be smart to try to step aside and let other people try to cast it as something other than we all know that it was, which is what takes me back to what we are learning from these Fox personalities who were imploring the White House to take a different turn. These are folks who are driving a false narrative around all of this. But in the critical moments, when they thought they had the president's ear or the chief of staff's ear, they were waving a red flag saying, this is horrible, this is wrong, you're going to ruin everything with this. That was the most honest appraisal that we've seen.
Still, let me book Ted Cruz so he can spout the very lies that I'm concerned about spouting there. I mean,
but I will say, even in that clip, John, if you really watch it closely, the way I see it is, Hannity at the end there is saying, there's not really any chance this is going to work. I mean, I don't want to sell any false hope to people, but he's still obviously advancing it. I'm not denying that.
No, I think you're exactly right. I saw the exact same thing there, David. Clearly he didn't believe it and was sort of half saying it, yet he still put the guy on TV to lie.
Right.
Yeah, good point. David Gregory, Alyssa Farah Griffin, thank you to both of you.